Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on Saturday afternoon, Family Day of Mardi Gras for the Mind. I know you're excited to, as I am, to really dive deeper into Chris Lipp's book about the science behind personal power. So let's give it up for Chris Lipp.
Thank you.
So as some of you all know, I run a podcast called The Seismic Shift, and so I'm going to treat this like Chris is my guest on my podcast, and we're going to go really deep. Are you ready? So what I'm so interested in is your journey. How in the world? This is his third book, by the way. Bravo to that. It's so hard, not only writing a book, publishing a book, promoting a book. So well done, my friend. I'm so curious about your story. You just got here to Tulane as the Director of Management Communication in 2023, right?
That's right.
How did you, what's your story? How did you get here?
If I were to look around and I would look at everybody in this audience right now, I imagine some of you guys have had some pretty interesting work experiences with colleagues and bosses and not always going the way you want it. How many of you guys have had bad experiences at work? And I love that some of you guys haven't raised your hands. Wonderful. That's the best optimists in life. And actually, personal power is correlated with optimism. So I had the same issue. You know, when I was an engineer and I went into business management and all these things, you don't need to know too much. But I started to face managers that were they really dominated with authority, these things. They really put others down to make themselves feel big. And I suffered. I was like this, I get anxious and all these things. And anyway, some of my colleagues, they were just unruffled. And they're like, I love that guy. He's a really good person or whatever, And I started to wonder, what could I do to really protect myself in these situations? And how do some people succeed in these environments that I think seem otherwise detrimental? And the first thing I studied, Michelle said I had 3 books. I did. The first one I studied was really on persuasion, right? The first couple were on persuasion, pitching startups, and then I went into helping. Eventually, I left that job and boss I was talking about, and helped startups raise a lot of money. But have you guys ever been in a room where you might be saying something or you're seeing people communicate, but there's almost like an undercurrent of communication also happening? It's like some people are big and some people are small. Sometimes you can walk into a room and you immediately know who's in charge without formal titles, without business cards. And for some reason, you automatically kind of know who's this person you don't even want to listen to. Like everybody else treats that person bad, you start to treat that person bad. And the thing is, it's kind of normal to human nature. It's just status. If any of you guys were just in this talk across the way a moment ago, some people show up big, sometimes we show up small. We all do this. We've all been big, we've all been small. And I wanted to understand, well, why do we show up this way? And how is that communicated to the people around us? Right? How can we not show up small? How can we show up big? And so there's a lot of research on this. Some of it is very much like, how do you wield power, for example, right? But I think the problem with that is if you don't have a lot of power, formal power, right, control of resources and these things, that's not really a way to go about it. That's not even a way to become a leader, because a lot of people say, here's how to use power, but you're like, I just want to get some power, thank you very much. And so we look at status, how to gain respect, and there's techniques about that, how to get yourself ahead. But how many of you guys kind of consider the seeking power as a little bit Machiavellian? Just raise your hand if you think it's kind of an ends justify the means sometimes. And that really didn't resonate with me, because I've done a lot of my own personal growth in this lifetime. And so I wanted to find out, well, what does psychology say that we can do that makes us feel good on the inside, but then gets us respect and admiration on the outside, respect mainly. It just seemed like, psychologically, as in human nature and evolution, what makes us feel good on the inside should make us successful on the outside. And so that's what the book, The Science of Personal Power, is all about. Here are the things you can do that will make you strong, feel big, and then show up big.
Oh, I love that. And so it sounded like that first book that you wrote on pitches did very well.
Yeah.
And I want to know, how did you get to New Orleans?
How to get to New Orleans from there? Well, so then it was just a journey from, I was originally at Stanford, I went to another university in California, I came to Rice University in Houston, I came to Tulane after, and it was a great city. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys are locals, how many of you guys are visiting in, but it's been a real pleasure being here.
How many students do we have? Raise your hands. I see. Oh, fantastic. Thank you for being here. Y'all, I teach at Loyola right next door, and I taught business communication and management communication for years, and now I just teach in the MBA program. So Chris and I have a lot in common. Okay, so thank you for sharing your journey with us, and particularly for the students in here, and then for those of us who really would like to be seen as perhaps an executive. There are some strategies. I would love to hear those concrete strategies of what we can do to position ourselves as executives.
To really understand that is so personal power is your belief in your own capacity to create impact. Personal power is a belief in your own capacity to create impact. And why that definition is so important is because you see it's a belief we hold about ourselves, very much like self-esteem. And the way to really bolster this belief, it's not like you can go home and just affirm, I believe in myself. Sort of like, I had anxiety problems when I was growing up under pressure and things, and my dad would be like, just don't stress. I'm like, oh, duh. Oh, thanks, Dad. Never worked, right? So telling somebody to be confident, telling somebody to be powerful, it doesn't work. And so what the research shows is there's 3 things that really create personal power. One is a way of being courageous. They've done a lot of research on courage. I call it courage. But there are certain things that implies. And then serving others and asserting yourself. Those are really the 3 pillars: courage, serving others, and asserting yourself. And I think in society today, it's actually very split. Like if you look at sort of kind of popular business workplace behavior, it's like, I'm just going to be dominant, right? I'm going to be the macho, masculine type of thing. And everybody's looking for kind of a quick way of just being strong.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some of the literature on power pose, I love Amy Cuddy's work on power posing and things. But when we think about it as just body language, it's just superficial, right? It's just on the outside. It's not showing what's on the inside. And if somebody can walk in, they can look all powerful, but the minute they start speaking, everybody suddenly knows what this person's really feeling on the inside. So I want to understand, what is that, right? And in the personal growth literature, you see a lot of focus on basically servant leadership. I mean, all of you guys know what servant leadership is. But service leadership is not sufficient. And we all know this because we know people who are people pleasers who get nowhere, right? And so there's this balance that has to be taken between serving and asserting ourselves in order to gain this respect. And that comes from, we could almost say, an inner respect, but it is your personal power.
Wow, that is powerful. Yeah, I would have all of my students do the Amy Cuddy power pose before their presentations. And so she was a Harvard professor, and her research was if you can fake it to make it, you can make it to become it. So I would have them right before a speech all stand up and do a power pose. And so even if you're feeling nervous, you convince your body that you're feeling courageous and strong and confident. And I think sometimes it worked, but I would have to agree with you that it really, let's just look inwardly first, right? That personal power. I think you said, I love this quote, personal power is a mindset, not a technique. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, well, by the end of today, by the way, I'm going to give you guys an emotional power pose that is scientifically validated to, basically, if you go into an interview, it's 81% more likely to get you the job, for example. Wow. But in any circumstance, I'll give that to you. It's a mindset in the sense of, again, it's a kind of a belief we have in ourselves. And if I were to share, just kind of to give you kind of a touch of what's in the book, that first point of courage. Well, the very first thing I talk about in the book is this idea of ownership. What does that mean? Well, in business, there's this common phrase, which is you should associate yourself with wins and distance yourself from failures. You want to look like you're the star. But if you read, for example, Bob Iger is the CEO of the Disney company. And if you read his autobiography, one of the things he said is he went into this meeting when he was just a junior exec at NBC Sports. Not an exec, like a junior guy at NBC Sports. And he said he made a mistake. They didn't get broadcasting rights to shoot, to do a track event where a world record was set. right? And so he was at fault for that. So the next Monday morning rolls around. Roone Arledge, who is the head of NBC Sports at the Times, walk-ins, and this guy is like a dominant leader, like the type of bully leader we really stereotype today. But he's also a genius. I mean, he created Monday Night Football. He brought in close-ups, slow, replays for sports. And so he walks into this meeting, and Bob Iger is explaining it in his autobiography. He's like, and everybody in that room is like scared of Roone, and you can see he's furious. Right? And he gets down, he sits down, and he just shouts. He's like, "Whose fault was that?"
Oof.
Right? To the whole room, and everybody's like dodging eye contact. Nobody wants to say anything. Well, it actually was Bob Iger's fault. I mean, you could say it was Bob Iger's manager's fault if you really wanted to, but it was Bob's fault. And so he's like, "Yeah, that was me." And he said at that moment, Roone stared at him. And then there was a little silence and the conversation just went on. And afterwards he said, after I did that, nobody could believe that I owned up to that. But after that, every time Roone walked by me in the hallway, he treated me different, with more respect. When we think about people who have power in the world, they're people who feel a control over things, right? We think of just formal power. You have control over things. But that also is an internal experience. When you feel a sense of personal power, you feel like you have an impact on the things that happen around you. For example, voters who feel a sense of personal power are more likely to think their vote matters. Voters who aren't in their personal power believe their vote doesn't matter. Oh, there's 300 million other people voting. And so they're like, what? Right? Same situation, but different perspective on their impact. Personal power will be like, where is my responsibility in this situation? And as a result of that, what they're going to do is they're going to own up to things. And what the research shows, and I go through this deeply in the book, what the research shows is when we take ownership and we take responsibility, especially when it's bad, people respect us more. Completely different than what we think. And a lot of us, what we do, and I'm totally guilty of this. So we're in a room full of human beings right now. Right. But often what we want to do is we don't want to associate ourselves with failure, so we blame. Don't we? Well, that was his fault, or this is a situation, or something. But what happens, according to the research, is when you blame, you're signifying to the person you're speaking to that I had no power over the situation. And so they just see, okay. I mean, they lose respect for you. Not because they're like, oh, this person's blaming. That's not a conscious thing. It's a subconscious thing. They're like, oh, this person has no power, right? Why should I respect them? They have no place in the world. So my first kind of tip to you guys is if you really want to start, enhance your power, just take responsibility. You respect people too when they take responsibility for their mistakes, because responsibility shows we can change.
Speaking of responsibility, this book is chock full of research, and he goes into great details of all of these cool experiments. And one of my favorite experiments that I read about is the fan experiment. So imagine that you're in a room and you're a part of this experiment, and you're either told this side that you're powerful and this side that you're powerless. And then we bring in this giant fan and just blow it straight on you. And so what we found is what he found is that those who felt powerful actually got up and moved the frickin' fan. Right? And then those who moved the fan were seen as managers and as somebody who should be promoted. And so that goes back to just take responsibility, right? You want to go dive deeper into the fan study? I love that.
It was interesting. So when we feel responsible, that is what they call the mediator for then action, right? Because when we feel like we have power over something, then we feel inclined to act. And so personal power is associated with action, taking action. Mm-hmm. And when we take action on something, for example, we move a fan that's blowing on us because it's annoying, and other people see us taking action, they're like, that person must be powerful. Not because they have ownership over the fan, but just they're acting in their environment. Whereas what's really fascinating is those who didn't feel in their power, they just kind of sat there and suffered with this fan blowing on them. Right? They're like scared to move it. I have no idea, right? But then people who saw them not moving the fan said, oh, they're not powerful. So another axis is, first is responsibility, which is really good, but also just taking action on our environment is seen as more powerful than not taking action. And what that means is taking initiative. Like if you're in a meeting room or you're around people, you're like, I'm going to do this, I'll take this up. That seems powerful. If you just wait for somebody to assign you to do something, it's not seen as powerful. It's just seen as, powerless because you're waiting for somebody else.
You had asked me to share with you my favorite chapter.
Yeah, please.
My favorite chapter was the zoom out chapter.
Yeah.
And because it has so much to do with the language you use, and there was a particular study that you cited on why women don't receive as much funding, venture funding, as men do.
Yeah.
And you drew the conclusion that it was because of the language that they used. So can you talk about
Yeah, I always get sensitive when I have to talk about like gender things because I'm obviously like a white man, right? So I'm just going to go by the study. This is just a study. This is not me. It was published out of Harvard in 2021 by three Harvard business women who wanted to understand why do women get less funding in startup culture, significantly less. And so they explored it, and they had a theory that it was in the way that women were pitching their startups versus men. And their hypothesis, the biggest thing they looked at was the use of abstract versus concrete language. So is this getting nerdy for you guys? Okay. All right. Because now I feel like I'm...
Good answer.
So men tend to speak more abstractly. Abstract is like ideas that are not concrete, not tangible, right? Concrete is tangible. So you can almost imagine like a television is tangible, a chair is tangible, right? But like abstract language would be like justice. It's a concept that we understand, but there's nothing to touch there. It's not concrete. So research in psychology has shown that men tend to speak more abstractly than women for a variety of reasons unrelated to power. I mean, for example, concrete language is shown to build relationships closer. And so perhaps because of conditioning or whatnot, men and women just speak a little bit different. But in the perceptions of power, people who speak more abstractly are seen as more powerful, right? So what they hypothesized maybe entrepreneur or VCs, venture capitalists, were judging women as weaker because they were using concrete language, even though they were using that language for totally different reasons. And they did that. They did a test. They did, yes, okay, first women were speaking more concretely, and then they did find that more abstract pitches were more likely to get funded, regardless of gender. And then they had the women pitch more abstractly, and it like increased the odds of getting funding like by 50% or something, by just one shift in language. So if you think about it, when you want to promote a new idea and you want to be seen as more powerful, think about it not in terms of like the details of what you're going to achieve with that idea, but the higher level vision that that idea might manifest into the world. And you'll be seen as more powerful and then more likely to be accepted.
Which goes back to Simon Sinek's research in his book that you and I both love.
Yeah.
It's selling the why rather than the what, right? So today is an election day. So if you cast a ballot, did you just cast a ballot or did you influence an election? That was one of the examples you used. Do you see yourself as having bigger, larger influence, more agency over your life, or just, oh yeah, I just cast a vote. Doesn't really matter, right? That matters, right?
Yeah.
The power of why.
Yeah, and you know, what's really funny is I'm teaching a course now on communicating personal power here at Tulane in the business school. And one of the things we were talking about on Thursday is how do we inspire other people? And sometimes, you know, a lot of us know what we want to do. Let's say you got a friend who wants to eat healthy or wants to go to the gym more, but they don't. And you could go up to them and you could sell all the benefits. You eat healthy, you'll be healthy, you go to the gym, you'll feel better. And they're like, I know. And they can't get themselves to go to the gym. Do any of you guys have friends like this? All right. I try to get my parents to eat more healthy. And what they found is what you can do, according to science, is instead of like listing off all the tangible, concrete benefits, like you'll be healthier and all that, ask them why. Like Simon Sinek, why do you want to go to the gym in the first place? Oh, well, I want to be healthier. Okay, well then you keep asking them why, right? And be like, well, why do you want to be healthy? And we were doing this exercise in my class on Thursday, and well, I want to be able to, you know, feel good about myself. Well, why do you want to feel good about yourself when you do all these things? Well, I just want to really experience life while I'm on this planet, you know, and I really need to be happy and healthy to do that. I'm like, well, there is your motivation right there. So if you want to empower somebody, try to get them to step into their why beyond just the tangible details. And you're doing a couple things by this. Number one, they perceive you as thinking a higher level already because you're pulling them into that level. And when they get pulled into the abstract realm as well of values, you've empowered them. This is what great leaders do. Great leaders, they don't just come up with a vision, right? A vision is powerful. But once they have a vision, the people around them, they try to fit them into the vision and explain how their contributions matter. And there's this story of JFK. Well, he goes into NASA when they're building the rocket to go to the moon, right? And this is for my second book. But and JFK goes and he sees a guy in the hallway and he's like, so what do you do? He's like, the guy gets all, he's like, I'm helping to send a man on the moon, sir. JFK didn't know, this guy was the janitor. You guys, some of you know this story, right? That's the empowerment we can do is no matter where somebody is or what they're doing, if you want to be a real leader, fit them into the broader vision, they will be empowered and inspired in that process.
That's beautiful. How many of y'all were in Charles Duhigg's session earlier on super communicators? Anybody? It's very similar. He shared an example of the doctor who cured prostate cancer and was not very successful trying to convince his patients to do nothing, even with all the research, because he was attacking the problem and going about it without asking,
That's right.
How do you feel? And so Charles Duhigg came up with 3 things as humans. We either want to be helped, heard, or hugged. And if you want somebody to listen to what you're having to say, you got to figure that out. Do they want to be helped, heard, or hugged, right? And that it goes in asking those questions. I'm sure everybody in here wants to take your class. I know I do. Sign me up. Okay, so you talk about the qualities of personal power that can help leaders move to executive roles. I would love to paint a picture of what anybody in here can do that will sabotage their personal power, and then paint a picture of what we can do to really accelerate.
Oh, there are 4 horsemen. I call them the 4 horsemen of killing personal power. Number 1, you guys already know it, blame.
Yep.
As you go up higher in the hierarchy, you're expected to take more and more responsibility and less blame. Number 1. Number 2 is proving ourselves. If you prove yourself, you implicitly communicate to other people that they have the authority to evaluate you, which puts them into a higher position of power. So proving, anytime you feel proving, we know that. But sometimes we feel small, and what do we do when we feel small? We want to prove ourselves, right? And so we try to prove ourselves, and somehow that doesn't seem to change anybody's opinion. It's because the act of proving, we've already undermined ourselves. And what we do, this shows up, for example, in startup pitches, interviews, and these things where we really are, we lose focus on serving whatever the goal is, for example, demonstrating fit during an interview, and instead we focus on just trying to show how great we are, which actually does the opposite. Blame, proving, my brain is blanking. But another one is inaction. These are them. Inaction, as you know, action is power. Inaction is not power. And reaction is the 4th horseman. Inaction and reaction. They did a negotiation study. I was thinking whether I should give you a story or a research. But they did a negotiation study, and they had one person get upset at the other person when the other person made an offer. And the people who were the people who were powerless, when the other person got upset, they changed their offer. They made adjustments, right? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked for so much. But the people who were personally powerful, the anger of the other person had no impact on them at all. They're just like, so do we have a deal or not? Right? And what happens is when we react to other people, we're demonstrating that they have influence over us, right? That's what reaction is. And so instead of reacting, and this happened, to one of my colleagues many years ago at Rice University, is there was and this was not at Rice, she was sharing a story from before that, her time there, but she was saying, I had this bully of a boss who, her director at the time, was just super narcissist, spouted vitriol all the time, cursing and stuff. And my colleague at Rice, she was sharing a story. She was like, if I was one-on-one with this person, I almost always left in tears. And if it was a meeting, I basically, I would just hope it wasn't me. I felt really bad when my colleagues got attacked, but I was just trying to hide so it wasn't me. So finally, she got the courage to go up to HR and tell them. And HR works for the business, right? And so they're HR is no, this is a great director. There's nothing we can do. Suffer. But because the HR person she was speaking to was also a human being, that HR person said, well, here's what I suggest, is the next time you're in a meeting and this person starts to attack you, I want you to not react. I want you to just sit there passively. Not passively, but... So that happened. Anyway, she goes into a meeting, wasn't very long, a few days or something, and her director locked eyes with her and just started attacking her, right? And she's just sitting there. And she's saying on the inside, I feel like anxiety through the roof, right? And just like, I'm not sure, should I defend myself? Should I attack back? What should I do? Should I succumb? But instead, she's like, well, remember this advice. So she just sat there like this. And just with like a passive look, did nothing, right? And eventually the tirade died down, and she still said nothing. And then it completely ended, and there's just the director sitting there in silence, staring at her, and she's just like this. And then something unexpected happened. The director looked away uncomfortably. She said after that, the director never bothered her again. And it makes sense when we understand it from personal power, because in personal power, what she conveyed when she was non-reactive was she conveyed, this person has no power over me, right? And to everybody in that room, everybody saw the same thing. And so now that director doesn't want to be embarrassed by showing that she has no power by attacking this person and having no reaction. I've heard this story now from a number of people, because I've been asking people to tell me about stories of personal power and stuff while I was writing the book. And that story has been repeated to me almost verbatim in different settings. Like when a bully comes up to me, I just sit there and I let them shout. And when they're done, I don't do anything. I just look at them, and they get uncomfortable eventually, right? Because they've had no impact on you.
Wow. I don't know about you all, but I'm on a mission to get rid of jerk bosses. Good luck, right? And they still exist. They're still out there for sure. But the good news about Chris Lipp's research and what we're seeing in workplaces is people aren't tolerating jerk bosses quite as much as we used to. How many of y'all have had a jerk boss? Yeah. It's really unpleasant, for sure. And you talk about Steve Jobs in your book, how he would just attack. And I'm an executive coach. I coach a number of leaders who still work in Silicon Valley and still have those stories, as I know you do too, of sleeping under the desk.
So one of the things, like
crazy.
You wrote this great book on the seismic shift in leadership, and we talk about service and stuff, and I'm sure that some of you guys are leaders or want to be leaders, and I'm not trying to give you like a feel-good way of being a leader. Here's the feel. No, the real leadership, the real leaders, they don't. Some of them sometimes dominate, fine, but it's not the dominance that makes them powerful.
That's right.
It's not the dominance. The dominance is agreeableness. The idea of being nice or not to other people or being mean to people has zero correlation. Well, no significant correlation to status or to personal power. Agreeableness has no impact. What does that mean? That means you can be nice or a jerk, but that's not what people care about. They care about, are you serving them or not? And I talked to this one not a congresswoman, she was a city council member in Texas. I said, and she was like, she didn't want it when she was getting elected. There was all this money against her and stuff, because she just was a normal mom before this. But she got in, and then she's been stayed in for like 3 times now or whatever. And I was like, how did you do it? What's your motto? She's like, oh, my motto's simple. She's like, I don't care if you like me. I'm here to serve you. And that service aspect. We sometimes reduce it to warmth and likability, but we like people who serve us, right? They can be hard, and sometimes they are hard, and it pushes us to be better, doesn't it? When it's in service to us and not to their egos. That's the difference, right?
Yes, and I want people, particularly in this audience, to understand that in order to have power, you don't have to be a jerk, right? That's that old model of power, that authoritarian must lead with an iron fist. And I have great empathy for jerk bosses, because I think a lot of them, men and women, show up that way because that's what they saw. They're just emulating what they saw. Somebody who yells, somebody who creates a culture of fear and intimidates you, and you work harder, and I want to be like my baseball coach who yelled at me all the time. Well, here's what's different is the workforce has changed and employees have changed since COVID, and generations have changed, and people after the Great Resignation said, I'm not working for people like that anymore. It's not worth my mental health, right? and the suffering and the stomach aches and the depression and the anxiety. So what I love about Chris's book is that he gives you a formula to actually demonstrate power without being that authoritarian jerk, right? Because that's just not good for anybody. So go ahead. So one of the things that you talk about is you talk about 6 practices of personal power. That's different than your horsemen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Can you go into those?
I got this article under review with Harvard Business Review right
Woohoo!
now. I'll give you
That's a big
the
deal.
lowdown of what there's in that article. Number one is, and I'm a communications guy. So number one, I like everything I think about is how does it work with our words? Like how do we speak? I don't want to, walk up there and act. And number one is take responsibility. You guys got that. Number two is speak with action orientation. So they found that when people are deliberating publicly, like here's the pluses and here's the minuses, what do you think we should do? Versus somebody's like, here, what are we gonna do? What's the plan? Here's implementation plans. Like, let's first do this, then do this, then do this. And they found that both are very seen as competent, right? I mean, somebody who's evaluating the pros and the cons of an idea versus somebody who's implementing an idea, yeah, they're both great. But in terms of personal power, the person who was, which do you think is more powerful now? Because it's action-oriented, right? So if you really want to be seen as powerful, come in with plans, not deliberation.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Number two, yeah. Number three is think the big picture. So always speak to the visions, right? Speak to the bigger picture. Number four is, I'm trying to remember exactly the ones I wrote for this article. Number four is, this is a very interesting one. Speak authentically. Okay, well, yeah, no kidding.
Let's deconstruct that, right?
Yeah, we'll sit there. Let's just sit there for the next 4 hours. We'll talk about authenticity.
Uh-huh.
So authenticity, there's a lot of confusion around what it means to be authentic, right?
Right.
And if let's say that you walk into a room and you don't, like, or you're around kids or whatever, or you're the boss, do you really care, like, or about how other people see you as much? Not as much. You're just going to speak what's true for you. If you were to, by the way, I got to give context here. If you were to separate someone who's powerful versus somebody who's not out of their power, and you were just to like really simplify it into one thing, it would be that powerful people focus on their own goals. Powerless people focus on the opinions of others.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Their impression management.
Mm-hmm.
Old goals was other, right? That's why proving is weak. Proving is.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that means for authenticity, right? If we're inauthentic, automatically we're often inauthentic for some purpose. And usually that purpose is the other opinion, right? The person's opinion or the people's opinion. But when we don't care, when we're plugged inward, we're just like, this is who I am. I want to be me. That's why it feels good to have personal power, and it feels terrible to be out of our power. And why anxiety is associated with less power is because we're anxious about other people versus optimistic and feeling in control because we're focused on what's important for us. And so when we think about authenticity, I think some people mistake authenticity for transparency.
Yes. Yes. Keep going. Yes.
I had a
Oversharing, right?
I had a colleague. I'll share a story from the book.
Yeah.
She was a friend actually, and she went through a divorce, and it was a bitter divorce. Her husband was ex-husband was taking the house and trying to take custody of the kid, and so it was just really, really bad. And in this, she was still killing it at work, and she's a director at work. And one day she goes to the CEO, and or the CEO knocks on her door and says, "Hey, how you doing?" Whatever, and give her work report. She was very well respected. And the CEO says, by the way, your husband just applied to this job, to this company. This is a small publishing company of maybe 50 to 100 people. So it's not some conglomerate, right? And she's like, and he's like, anyway, I'm thinking of hiring him.
Oh, gosh.
And then he left, and she's like, what? What just happened, right? So that weekend, I'm talking to her, and I'm like, you got to say this is not okay. You got to say something. Anyway, so she goes in the next Monday morning, or Monday afternoon, whatever. She goes into the CEO's office, and she promptly tells him, this is not okay. But what happens is she has an emotional meltdown as she's sharing this. She's in the middle of a divorce, right? It's hell. And she's crying, and and her voice is shrilling. She tells me, and then she left afterwards, and she's like, I blew it. And sure enough, CEO comes back the next day. He's like, I think you're too emotional about this. He's a good guy, so he hired him,
No,
hired
he
the ex.
did not.
He hired
No,
the
he
ex.
did not.
Talking about bad bosses, right? And then she applied to get a transfer to their branch office in London. This was in California, and which was approved. But it really brought home this idea that transparency is not authenticity, right?
That's
If you're in a business environment and you're talking about emotional things that are irrelevant to the business cases, nobody cares. And we think, well, I'm being inauthentic. Like, this is truly what I feel at the moment. Actually, you're not being authentic when you're transparent, because people who are low power, they're focused on the environment, aren't they? They focus more on what other people think, and they're distracted by potential threats that we make us much more aware of the environment. And so our attention is outward on things that don't matter, rather than on what matters, which is our goals and relevant to this moment. So that's inauthentic to our own values. What was relevant in that moment for her goals and for the goals of the organization was how does this affect business? And I propose this in the book. I mean, this is based on a lot of research out of UC Berkeley and stuff. But what I suggest that she could have done differently was go in there and just say, okay, this is going to be the business consequences on you and potentially the team if he gets in there, right? And so really focusing on the impact to those dynamics, not your emotional impact.
Absolutely, yes. And so when I talked a lot about authenticity in my first book, and I didn't get into trouble, but I had a lot of pushback from the big bosses, like, why are you telling everybody to show up authentically? That's not what I want. And so I've had to spend a lot of time like you, like figuring out it's not about just being telling everything about your life. Oh, this is just me. I want everybody to know everything about my life. No, not really, right? You got to focus on business, right?
Powerful people, interestingly, when they're at work, they're thinking about work. Okay.
Totally.
Right? And when they're at home with their kids and their family, they're thinking about home and family and kids. They're not thinking about work because they're focused on the goal of the moment that's relevant to them.
Right. So when I work with leaders, I run the Benson Leadership Academy, and just on Tuesday we were doing this exercise, kind of deconstructing authenticity. And what we've realized is, as these are kind of the high-performing leaders in all of her organizations, and we're trying to get them to the next level. And as long as you figure out what your greatest strengths are, to me, that's authenticity. Again, it's not oversharing. It's, okay, what are your freaking superpowers? Do you know who you are? Do you know what makes you better than everybody else? What makes you different? What makes you shine? Do you have self-awareness so that you can show up and lean into your strengths? That's authenticity, of knowing who you are, leaning into those strengths, and also knowing what your blind spots are, right? Like, I'll be very honest with y'all, I'm horrible with details. I am big picture, let's go, relationship, and I need somebody on my team constantly who catches, like the students in here, every time I hand out a syllabus, there's a spelling error in it, or that spell check, or some error in there that I would never ever see. And in the early part of my career, I beat myself up. I'm supposed to be good at everything. No, you're not. No, surround yourself with people who are good at that.
I love that.
Know who you are. To me, that's showing up authentically, right? Know your gifts, know your strengths. Okay, so keep going. My favorite quote is, personal power is the freedom to act on your own truth, embrace it. And I think that has so much to do with what we were just talking about, authenticity. Personal power is the freedom to act on your truth, embrace it.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys read these articles about like people on their deathbeds and hospice workers, and what are the top 5 things, regrets, or things you wish, were different about your life? And it's always things like, I wish I had spent less time at work. I wish I had been more authentic in my life, and all these things. We all have our values, and that's our anchor, is our values. And when we act in our values and align with our values, we feel better. And when we don't, we don't. And personal power is our ability to act on our values. Right? That's that difference between, I wish things were different, or I wish this wasn't happening to me, versus like, I'm going to just be this way. I'm going to stand up for what I believe. I'm going to speak up. And I love this because the rewards you get them externally. Like it doesn't just feel good. It's what makes you somebody that other people admire and respect. Not as a feel good, like every once in a while it does that, but sometimes you'll fail and it'll hurt. Might hurt sometimes, but it really is the heart of status in an organization and respect. We respect people who are in alignment with their values. We respect them when they take action on those values and when they serve us as well in that process.
The heart of status. I loved what you just said about that. Yes, you did. Oh, yes, you did. And again, it goes back to what we're saying, like you got to know yourself, right? That's first and foremost when it comes to leadership. And if you want to be perceived as a leader who just continues to get promoted, you got to not only know your strengths, but what are your values? What are your guiding principles so that you can stay true? Because that cognitive dissonance is what creates anxiety, which will then give you dry mouth in an interview, and then people perceive you as not having power because they can see the anxiety. That's because you're not aligned, and you might not show up as who you really are and what you value and what your strengths are. So this all goes together. You know what I want to make sure, because the audience really was excited about that technique you were going to share so that we could nail job interviews, I think.
Yeah, you guys want to know how to do this? Yes. And it also works in negotiations and big presentations before that and stuff. And I just had a student I taught this to, and then she got the job. So it's the emotional power pose. When we're anchored internally, we act differently. We just show up differently. You guys know it. You guys know when, for example, after you go through something that's very painful, you just kind of realign in yourself. And you're like, oh, and you start to show up differently. Or you feel confident or things. Anyway, so what you can do 20 minutes before a big stressful event.
Should we do this together?
Yeah, and it's not a power pose. I mean, but 20 minutes before an event, you got high, and instead of just getting there nervous and repeating what you're going to do and stuff or thinking about it, look at a list of values. It helps to have just some list of values you pulled off the internet or anywhere. It doesn't matter. I have them in my book, a list that they actually used in the research. And then you pick the top 3 values of that list. And then from that list, you pick the top number 1 value of those 3. And once you've got this kind of, okay, this is the most important value, then you spend 4 to 5 minutes writing about why this value is important in your life. It could be family, it could be integrity, honesty, it doesn't matter. But it's important to you. So you spend 4 to 5 minutes writing about it. What this does is our personal power is linked to 2 systems in our brain. All of you guys know the fear, fight, flight, freeze mechanism, right? That's one of 3 systems of motivation in our brain. It's sort of the most primitive. The other 2 that are more developed, or more, let's say later in our evolution, but equally powerful, are the behavioral inhibition system and the behavioral approach system. So the behavioral inhibition system is that which makes us freeze. I'm giving you the technique. You're like writing down, tell me the technique. Why the hell are you explaining it? I don't care. I just want to get my job.
Yep.
Why am I explaining it? Because I'm a nerd and I am a college professor. Thank you very much.
To know thyself.
The behavioral inhibition system is what makes you freeze and stuff, and it's connected to low power. And the behavioral approach system, which is make you like go into and jump into the water of a cold lake, that's your behavioral approach system that's associated with high power. If you sit and write about your top value for 4 to 5 minutes doing nothing else, you activate, you spin up the behavioral approach system. Doing nothing else, no interview skills, no better resume, you're 81% more likely to get hired. Why? Because you've anchored now, you've taken your attention off of what other people are thinking, and you've put your attention on inside what's important to you, and it just, your whole psychology has changed. New systems showing up. And what's important is, and the important thing is the writing. So you know your value. So once you have your value, and I recommend you got to do this fresh every time, 20 minutes before a big stress situation, go through that list again, pick the top value in that moment that's most important to you in your life, and just 4 to 5 minutes. And it's the writing of it and the reflection of it that's spinning up the personal power, brain motivation.
So first of all, buy his book. Look at the page of values. Choose the top 3 values, right? have that on your phone, take a picture on your phone, and before every interview, then pick that one value, and then write about it, and you'll be, what, 80% more likely to get the job?
81,
At least?
yeah. Yeah, and I got I basically took everything that's scientifically validated to put you into your personal power, and I spread that throughout the book. I suppose the message I just want to leave you with is all of us in the room, we all are, sometimes we feel high power, sometimes we feel low power. And we go through this out the day, different people, different situations. But you have the ability to show up more in your personal power. And that's why I wrote the book, to give you really ways to do that, to really understand it, so that you can really show up the best in this life.
That was beautiful, Chris. Look at us. Boom! 0.0 seconds in the, way to go. That was awesome. Thank you so much, all, for being here, spending time with us. Bye now.